Okay, so the whole point of this video is basically to show people who want to know how to paint their Mcfarlane 1989 Batmobile the right way. And anyone who owns this thing already knows that there was kind of an annoying issue where the roof was gray. Basically, it was left unpainted, looks like, from the factory. But I don't know if the movie came out. Maybe that's what it's supposed to look like in the movie. But either way, in my opinion, I think a lot of people also said the same. Looks pretty ugly. Batmobile should be fully black. So this is really just kind of like an intro level video for people who just want to do basic paint work, and I'll also show you how to add some other kind of touch-ups that might make your Batmobile look a little bit better. So I just added basically headlights to mine also with some gold paint and some tail lights in the back. I'll show you how to paint those also. And the process is pretty simple. And you only need a few things. Obviously, you need the Batmobile, which you're going to paint. And beyond that, this is basically all you need. So you don't need that many brushes. I just have them here. You really only need essentially a brush to just actually paint on your primer, paints, things like that. And ideally, you'd want to keep a separate brush, which you're going to use for sealer. It shouldn't be too big of a deal, but generally sealers kind of wreak havoc on brushes, and you got to wash them out quickly. If you don't want to risk ruining a brush that you like, just keep a separate one for the sealers. But this is an acrylic sealer, which I'll get into later, so they're not that aggressive regardless. So you don't really need this. This is just for sanding and things like that. That's going to be the first step, as you'll see. And basically the process is you just need some sandpaper here. I just have 400 grit. That's the only one you really need. You're going to sand down the roof and pretty much any other area that you're going to paint. So in my case, I did the roof. Let me see if I can get some better light here. Yeah, I did the roof. You can see that's fully blacked out. I did the wheels too. Yep, just made them silver like the movie. I also did the headlights in gold. If you can see that. Yep. And finally, I also did the tail lights in kind of like a metallic red. And let me just turn this so you can see it a bit better. Yep. And yeah, so I'm basically going to show you just some techniques. And this is really, you could paint anything, not just the Batmobile, using these kind of tips. Like you could paint your figures, whatever. And this is more or less a pretty easy paint job because the whole car is black. Anyway, getting back to the materials, so yeah, get yourself a tray where you could actually just pour out your paints. And really the only colors I needed was just black and red for the tail lights and gold also. And I'm going to cut the video here just to show you what the primer looks like. And yeah, most importantly, you're going to need good primer. So I used Vallejo primer, and make sure you get a good one because don't cheap out on primer. And this is going to be the first step. So essentially, and I'll just kind of quickly walk through what the basic premise is. You just sand down any area you're going to paint. So in my case, it was the roof and the wheels, and put down your primer. And you always want to paint in thin layers and let it dry. So for mine, it dries almost instantly. So really, you could just paint on like right wherever you place the primer after, I'd say like 15 minutes or so. And that's actually what I did. And it turned out fine. Yeah, these things dry very quickly. And, use your good judgment. Like, if it looks globby, which it won't, because this is pretty high quality stuff, don't put any paint on top of it. Always paint in thin layers. If there's one thing you take out of this video, never glob on your paint, okay? And you'll kind of see how I paint later. I'm going to show you just kind of cuts of it. Always paint in thin layers. You'll get a better result. Your paint will be stronger also, and it'll really stick. So if you glob on the paint, it's going to flake off. It's going to look really crappy too. And it's just completely unnecessary. Okay, and you're not going to speed up the process. Trust me when I say you're going to waste the time fixing kind of that, like, the sloppiness versus just taking your time and painting in thin layers. So always paint in thin layers. Also, always thin out your paints. Like, don't paint straight out of the bottle pretty much ever. And just so you know what brand I'm using, okay, and I'll just say right here. So for the headlights, I'm using Inklab Metallic Gold, very cheap brand on Amazon. I'll tell you right now that this isn't the greatest metallic paint you could buy. I'm just cheap. And the only real difference is you just have to apply more layers with this. It doesn't have as much pigment, I guess you could call it. So you have to paint in multiple layers, but it still comes out looking amazing, and it comes out strong also. If you want to save yourself some time, get yourself a higher quality brand, maybe like Vallejo or something, but this does work if you're cheap like me, so you keep that there. For the taillights, same thing, I'm using Inklab Metallic. You could get this brand on Amazon. Full set, it's only like 25 bucks or something when I got it. For the roof itself, I'm just using some cheap paint I got at Michael's, Craft Smart. Worked fine, you could see that. Looks amazing, in my opinion. For the wheels, I actually had a good one kind of laying around. Vallejo metal color. And you can see that there. Let me get a better picture there. Yeah, painted the wheels silver, just like the movie. And beyond that, yeah. Another thing you don't want to cheap out on is sealer. This is the last step. You're going to apply 2 coats of sealer. And don't cheap out on sealer, and don't cheap out on primer. So just go with Vallejo. That's what I use. This is all brush-on paint. I'm sure there's people who know how to do this with an airbrush. Shouldn't be too difficult. Again, I just didn't feel like getting an airbrush. For me, I always use brushes, and it always turns out fine. If you're going to go the route of painting the entire car like in a matte finish, then I'll definitely be using an airbrush. And I might do that at some point in the future. But this is just a simple fix for people annoyed with the gray roof for the most part. So that's really all you need. And I'm going to basically show you each step. And a lot of it is just rinse and repeat. So this is a very simple paint job, and you really should do it. And, don't be afraid to do it. There's really no reason to be afraid to do it. And don't fool yourself. Like, the gray roof is hideous. Like, there's no way around that. Like, a Batmobile should be pure black. So just follow these steps, and you'll get your Batmobile looking the way it should be. Okay, so I'm going to cut the video here. And yeah, so I'm just going to show you each step. Okay, the first step is you have to sand down the ugly gray roof that Mcfarlane decided to go with for this one. I don't know if that's what it looks like in the movie, but yeah, you had to sand down every part that you're going to paint. And that goes for the rest of this video too. And yeah, it's going to be painful considering how difficult it is to find this thing right now, at least.
Once I was as you are now, but I promise it will pass. I promise, I promise.
But yeah, so basically any part that you're planning on painting, which shouldn't be too many if you just want a basic fix on this car, yeah, make sure you sand them down well. And the sandpaper I'm using here is actually 400 grit. Don't do circular movements. It technically doesn't matter, just because you're going to be putting so many layers of paint, you probably won't notice anyway. But try to stay in one kind of motion like I'm doing here. Just go straight back and forth. And then yeah, just be thorough. And I will say be extra careful around the windows. Like, you don't want to scratch those. Fixing those will be a pain in the ass. It won't be as easy as just buffing them out with a high grit sandpaper. It's going to be in there still. And if that does happen, you're going to have to go through the whole pain of kind of using rough sandpaper, working up to fine grits to polish it out. Don't put yourself through that. This is the only part of this entire project you have to be extra careful. So as you're sanding the frame here on the cockpit, make sure you get the sliding latches too. You see that right here. As you're sanding, make sure you don't hit the glass at all. The plastic glass, whatever, but make sure you don't hit that. Otherwise, it's going to be a pain. After this step, you'll see me just putting primer on. And I'm going to skip the part where I put the black paint on, but it's the same process, really, that's why. So first I'll show you how to mix the paint, which you'll see coming up shortly. And yeah, very simply, primer goes on, black paint goes on, sealer goes on. And you're going to see me doing that in the next few clips. Okay, once you finish sanding the roof, it should look something like this. It should feel fairly rough to the touch. And that's perfect because that's what's going to let the primer really eat in. Yeah, make sure you get those sliding pieces too. You really should paint those to make this thing look nice. Yeah, make sure the whole surface is thoroughly sanded. And don't forget to sand underneath the roof too. You really should be painting that. You'll see me lift the latch up. You don't need to sand directly under the roof. That's not necessary. Just the outer sill should be more than enough. Okay, and you'll see me lift the roof to show you that in a second. Okay, so before I show you under the roof, yeah, just quick how-to on how to work with acrylic paint. Essentially, only pour out like 1 or 2 drops, work in small amounts so you don't waste the paint. Work with a damp brush, so don't drown your brush in water. And you essentially just want to mix the paint with a damp brush, maybe just 1 or 2 drops of water. And the consistency you're looking for is something that flows, but you don't want watery. Okay, watery is going to make a mess, and you'll see here. So yeah, use water. Yeah, try to keep it clean. This is just mildly used water. Yeah, generally you just want to work with paint that flows easily and sticks. So don't have anything that's too watery and don't have anything that gunks up your brush. If you notice it drying on your brush very quickly, that's not the right consistency. So you're going for something that looks like this. You could go with maybe a little bit thinner, but honestly, this should be fine. Before you start painting, knock off excess paint on the brush, otherwise you're going to make a mess. And you're going to see me do that here. Just work with a very lean brush, like you shouldn't have too much paint sitting on it. Okay, now back to the sanded roof. Yeah, and so now you know how to work with paint. Right now we're going to put primer, so don't get that mixed up. You're not putting the black paint yet. We're putting primer down right now. Okay, so you just know how to work with paint right now. Now primer specifically, you don't need to thin down so much, so go easy here. You only need a damp brush. Don't add a single drop of water. Just a damp brush, mix the primer, and that's more than enough. Primer is very thin and runny. Don't expect to see good coverage. And I know this, when the first time I painted with acrylic, I panicked because it looks so ugly the way primer goes on, but don't worry, you're not really looking for full coverage. It's nice if you could get it. It's not that hard, but don't worry about streak marks and things like that. The whole point of primer is to help the black paint, which you're going to put on later, catch on. Now, just a note here, I'm not going to show you the full process of how I paint this thing black because it's essentially the same thing. Move in straight lines, just like you always should be with paint that you're putting on this thing. Don't paint in circles. Yeah, just paint in straight, smooth lines and use your good judgment. Okay, so just use a smaller brush when you're trying to get to more detailed areas. The same way I'm putting the primer on here, that's the same way you're going to be putting the black paint on afterwards. It usually takes primer, from my experience, the one I'm using, Vallejo, it took about I just let it dry for like maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour. That's all you really need. And then I just went straight to the black paint and just put it right on top. And these acrylic paints, these are cheap brands, they still dry pretty quickly. So you don't need to sit there forever waiting. Like, you could get this done in a day if you're diligent. Yeah, I'd say give it like an hour, and you should really just, again, use your good judgment. Don't paint on a wet surface. Like, if you have wet primer sitting there, obviously don't paint on top of it. Let it dry out. Should look pretty matte, like a matte finish once the primer is on. That's when it's ready to take some black paint. Okay, it's the same process. So I'm not going to show you the black paint part because it's going to be the same thing really. And in the next few clips, you'll see how the primer starts to kind of build up onto this thing. Right now, this is primer going on. Okay, and again, yeah, be careful. If you do kind of get primer, paint, whatever in areas you don't want, that's not a big deal. It's not like if you get sandpaper you don't want it. That is a big deal. Yeah, you could just knock it off with a Q-tip. Not a huge deal at all. Okay, so don't go crazy trying to be perfect. Try to be neat as you can, because it is more work at the end of the day if you need to knock off sloppy paint. But don't stress it too much. Like, this should be just relatively straightforward and easy. And as you're painting, if you notice your brush starting to dry up, if the bristles are starting to separate, that's a good time to wash the brush out. Okay, never paint with a dried out, gunked up brush, which it will. It will. Wet your brush, knock off the old paint. Yeah, knock the brush in the water can, water bottle, cup, whatever you're using. Knock it around so you knock the pigments off the brush. Get a clean brush, has to be sparkling clean, and then just start the process over. Wet your paint again if you need to, and then just rinse and repeat. All right, so you're supposed to be painting with flowing paint that does what you need it to. Don't fight against the paint. You're going to get ugly results. See, everything I'm doing here is going on extremely smooth. That brush is still good. You see how it's just flowing nicely? The brush is bending. That's what you're going for. Okay, do not paint with this like spiky, spiny brush that's just dried up with paint. Be careful here. Again, yeah, go slow like this and then just get the paint where it needs to be. That's it. This is all primer again. Okay, once your primer is on fully, you'll start to see the roof look like this. And yeah, I'm just showing you how to just do a little bit more detail work. Yeah, use a smaller brush. It'll make your life easier. And yeah, it's going to look like a nice matte finish like this. That's generally what you're going for. And here's that under roof shot like I promised. Again, don't sand under that roof like that kind of triangular piece you see there directly under the top of the roof. Not necessary. Leave that alone. That's just too much work. Just do the outer sills like you see I have here. That kind of straight vertical pillar reaching to where that where the cockpit locks into the car, you don't need to do that either. Again, just that circumference piece along with the sliding pieces, that's all you need to sand down. Don't give yourself more work than you need to. And you see I didn't touch those areas at all. You'll see it shining. That means I didn't sand it down. So be thorough. And I'm just doing the same thing here. I'm just putting primer in underneath the roof right now. And yeah, I was using my phone so you don't really see it, but it's the same idea. Go slowly. Try to be as neat as you can. And definitely don't drip anything inside the interior because that's going to be a pain in the ass to clean out. Okay, just again, more detail painting. Yeah, go slow here. Try to pull the brush away from you as you're getting to these more detailed areas. Go slow. Pay close attention to how your brush hairs move. And trust me, you'll really get into this when you start painting. You'll know how certain brushes behave. And again, don't go too crazy here. Like, you could wipe off any parts that you mess up, or if it's a little sloppy with a Q-tip. Better do it sooner than later. If you wait too long and it dries up, then you're going to need a toothpick, and that's not ideal. So if you mess up, have a Q-tip standing by, just wipe it off quickly. And it helps to have the Q-tip doused in like rubbing alcohol. Yeah, rubbing alcohol takes acrylic off easy when it's wet. Just don't let it get onto parts that you already painted and you're okay with. And yeah, again, this is just more primer. You notice the matte finish, that's all just primer. And that's pretty much it. And next, the black paint is going to go on. It's the same thing. Be careful, apply it so it's even, and you'll get the same result that you'll see later. Okay, so this is what it'll look like after the black paint goes on. Yeah, it'll look very similar to the primer because they're both black, obviously. It's a nice matte finish, and as nice as that looks, yeah, you have to seal it with gloss. Okay, gloss finish is always a better sealer than matte finish, and if you do want a matte finish, yeah, you just use matte finish, and Vallejo has the same thing if you want to do that. If you do that, though, you have to kind of spray paint the rest of the car matte finish, which is why I'm just going with gloss for this video. I might do a follow-up where I spray paint the whole car with matte finish, but for today, if you just want to keep it simple like I am, you have to match the finish of the rest of the car, so just go with gloss, and all you need is 2 coats. And same idea. So with sealer, just pour out a good amount, and you do need to use a damp brush, just like the instructions say. That'll help the sealer kind of spread out more evenly. Same idea. So again, use a brush that's kind of separate for your sealer. When you are finished painting the sealer on, wash that brush out good, because don't ruin that brush. Sealer will destroy your brush if you let it dry on fully, okay? Because this is essentially going to dry into something that feels like a rubbery plastic. Wash that brush out quickly once you're done. And yeah, again, do not glob on your sealer. That's going to be a nightmare, okay? So be even. And don't be afraid of this part. It's going to look very ugly. Don't worry, you're not ruining anything. It'll dry on very smooth. This is designed to just kind of lay flat. Now, I will say one thing. Try to be as smooth as you can, okay? So avoid streaks. Yeah, and you see the streaks I'm kind of creating here. You could easily smooth those out. Move in straight, uniform lines. So don't pick up your hand and just move a straight line front to back. That'll give you the best finish. And right now I'm just focusing on coverage. You'll see me kind of smooth it out as we go. Yeah, so do not leave it like this, streaky and just kind of short strokes. Do a long stroke front to back, and that's how you really get the good results. Okay, again, here right now I'm just focusing on coverage. You do want to smooth out the sealer. Just use long, uniform strokes. Just make sure you get it in all the places you need it first. Don't forget the sliding parts too. Probably the most important, because those are the most sensitive. Don't forget that lock-in piece where it locks into the engine bay. Make sure you put primer on that too. Sealer, my mistake. And that's it. So you're already done with probably the most glaringly ugly part now. Okay, from here on is really just optional. If you want, you could do the bat logos and the taillights and headlights. If you want the 1989 look, yeah, definitely do the bats at least, which you're going to see coming up right now. Okay, so if you want to actually go the route of painting the bats, which you should if you want to make it look like the 1989 version, very simple. Just break off a tiny piece of sandpaper and do the same thing you've been doing, just sand the bat only. And be careful not to sand inside the hubs. Just be accurate here. Only sand the bat, and you don't need to overdo it. You just want to rough it up a little bit so the primer sticks, and then the chrome paint that you should put on top of it, that has to stick also. Again, the paint I'm using here is Vallejo metal color acrylic, and the specific color is chrome. Okay, and really any silver color will do. And if you're really scared about doing this part, I could verify that permanent marker, metallic silver permanent marker works really well. To a point where it wouldn't be necessary to paint this. Paint does generally look better, but in this case, yeah, permanent markers do look really good if you use them here. So that's an option too. Okay, and I want to talk briefly about how to clean up your work, and I was intentionally sloppy with the bat here just to give you an example of how to clean like a messy, or a bit of a mess if you just went outside the lines or whatever. Again, not a huge deal. I'm using a toothpick doused in alcohol, and I even let the paint dry just to show you that, yeah, you can take it off. And don't use a sharp toothpick, like blunt it a little bit, because a sharp toothpick will scratch the plastic and you'll see it, so blunt it. And again, be neat, okay, because this isn't exactly fun. Just be neat and try to avoid going this route. And yeah, use a Q-tip to really just get off like the gunk that's just floating around also. Okay, for the headlights, I'm using Ink Lab Warm Gold Metallic. Same process, again, sand down the original headlights, and then put your primer down. Always put primer on, don't ever kind of shirk that. And yeah, paint in thin layers. And you're going to see an example of what this will look like when it goes on. You're not going to get great coverage with a cheaper brand of paint, so don't expect to see it go on clean. And don't be compelled to glob on the paint just because you don't see a clean kind of layer of paint going on. It's going to take multiple layers. And the idea is each additional layer is going to add on top of it, and it's going to start to close out the primer where you'll only see gold eventually. Again, be as neat as you can here. Try not to splash the paint outside the headlight area. Just go slow. It saves you a lot of headache. Cleaning isn't fun. It'll come off, but it really isn't fun. By the way, if you're cleaning up and you have some stubborn bits of paint stuck, you could always just paint over it in black. Like I said, this is an easy paint job. If there's a stubborn spot of paint, don't sit there digging at it for half an hour. Just simple. Just brush over some black paint. That's more than enough. You're going to seal everything anyway, so it'll still be durable. Okay, and that's basically it. Once you have the headlights done, once you have the bat done, the roof, you just did a basic paint job where you have your final, you finally have a 1989 accurate Batmobile, more or less. And yeah, it should come out looking something like this. And yeah, don't be afraid to just go ahead and try this tutorial. Don't make any excuses. The gray roof is horrible. Don't live with that. And yeah, just give it a try. Keep an eye out for more of my videos. I'm mostly just a painter, and I'll do fixes here and there too. I might do reviews later on, and yeah, just keep an eye out. Subscribe. Write something in the comments. If you have any questions, I'll definitely answer all of them. And yeah, that's pretty much it.